interesting. University of Pennsylvania, which is such a fancy school. It's not quite Harvard League, but it's up there. It's very reputable. It's got a huge endowment. It's regarded as a source of pride in the community. They were, I would say, ground zero for some of this madness. That's where this man called himself Lia Thomas, joined the women's swim team. He had his twig and berries, but he claimed he was a woman. He would insist on changing in the change rooms. It was so obviously abusive. But the entire administration was fine with it. It was only when some brave female swimmers stood up to it did that start to tumble. Tell us the story of University of Pennsylvania and how that story culminated just a week or two ago.
Well, it's quite a story, actually, Ezra. The 2022 NCAA championships in swimming, women's swimming, saw this man win, NCAA women's titles and exclude people like Riley Gaines and Paula Scanlon and so many women from their awards or from their rightful awards. And everybody knew the problem. Everybody could see it. And very few people back in 2022 dared to say anything. But that seemed to be the final straw for some of these young girls. They finally started to speak out. And as most of our viewers would know, Riley Gaines has gone on to being a highly recognized person across the United States, fighting very strongly for female-only sport. And finally, this past week, University of Pennsylvania signed the agreement with the Department of Education that, yes, they had violated Title IX. Yes, they would apologize to their female athletes. They would post it on their website that their sports heretofore will be female only in the women's category. It's a great victory for women's sports.
It's incredible that, really, other than, let's say, Harvard, this is as prestigious a place as it gets. And they were as adamant as possible. They went to bat for this man, quote, Lia Thomas, so hard. So for that, I'm not going to say it's a groveling, abject flip-flop, but actually I sort of think it is. To apologize to the women, to strip the men of their fake awards and medals, and to they basically apologized to women. It was as total as surrender as possible. Now, not a lot of Canadians know what the phrase Title IX means, and I'm not even sure if I have a total command of it. That's basically a legal promise in the United States that universities have to treat women's athletics on the same terms as men's athletics. It was really designed to let women enter sports and to say to universities, you can't just support the men. Now, that was in terms of having a women's team in addition, like maybe it wasn't as lucrative, but really, if you're letting men beat up girls, you're violating Title IX. Do I get it? Did I understand it correctly?
Yes. It was a rule passed in 1972. And even I, as a Canadian athlete back in the 80s, was able to take advantage and have a full athletic scholarship to get my university degree out of the University of Maryland. It has helped so many women across the world and in the United States to obtain an education and to be able to compete at a higher level in collegiate athletics and then going on to even higher performances. So Title IX has really made an impact in the last 50 years. And I even credit Title IX for the emergence of the soccer moms in the 80s and 90s, all the women who care so much about sports and putting their kids in sport. It's led to women starting their own businesses. It's had a huge economic impact. And so for the woke to undermine Title IX in the way they have been doing in the last 10 years is disgusting. It's undermining everything about this culture in our society in the West. And it's really great. I'm very happy to see this turnaround.
Yeah, it really is incredible. I think Title IX, I think it's fair to say when it was made law some 50 years ago or so, you could call it feminist. I wouldn't say like radical feminist, but it was equality for both sexes. And like you say, it really unlocked a whole field of life for women. It made women's sports a career, a project, a hobby, a passion, an activity. Like it opened up a whole, and then to use, and then for these elite universities, especially in these elite organizations, to then turn around on women and inject men into them. It reminds me of how these elite universities, who claim to be so progressive, often screen out Asian candidates from admission because the Asian kids do really well, just statistically speaking, on entrance exams. So you have universities like Harvard or Columbia that claim to be progressive on issues of race, actually discriminating against Asian Americans because they were smart. And you have these same progressive institutions actually discriminating against women. I just find it, the similarity I'm pointing to, Linda, is that these people claim to be the guardians of civil rights and the champions of minorities or women. And in fact, they were the undertakers who were destroying the rights in both cases. I'm delighted to see the pendulum swing back in the United States, though. Give me a quick survey of the scene in the U.S. Given that Trump signed that executive order so early in his term, and that he's following through with the different departments like the Department of Education, are there any holdouts in the United States? Are there any institutions or leagues or other things that are resisting a return to common sense?
There are holdouts. Every Democratic state is holding out. The Republican states protect kids in school, sports, and even in universities. And yet the Democratic states, run by obviously Democrat governors, are resisting this and are allowing boys and men to compete in women and girls sports in open defiance of the Trump executive order. And by the way, in defiance of the law, which is Title IX. And just this week on Monday, California rejected a letter from the Department of Education that is reprimanding California for allowing boys to compete against the girls. And it's been happening all spring. We've been watching it. And they just simply refuse, even though Governor Gavin Newsom on an interview admitted that it was grossly unfair to have a girl competing against a boy. And yet the state sort of bureaucracies continue to thumb their nose at the federal government in the United States just because.
Yeah. You know, that's very interesting. I didn't know there were so many holdouts. I'm not surprised. It's so ideological. It really is a leading edge issue for so many folks. But I think that ordinary people, I think it's got to be like 70% to 30% or 80% to 20%. People who just, especially, there's different ways to talk about it. You can be sort of mean and angry, or you could say, guys, look, these are women and girls. They need their own space. Like, there's different ways to communicate this stuff. And I think the Riley Gaines of the world have been very smart about how they've done it. You know, that image of Trump being surrounded by women and girls signing the executive order. I remember even J.K. Rowling commenting on it. Like, how did the Democrats fumble an issue that so many mums and daughters, it's not an, I just don't know how these Democrat politicians can dig their heels in when they're against the will of the people and when they're against women and girls. I just think that's a strange political hill to die on. I don't know the stats in California. Is that state in support of boys and men entering women's sports, or is it just the politicians? Like, do you know if ordinary Californians are happy with transgenderism in sports, or are they like the other Americans?
They're like the other Americans at ground level, except that the leadership class is still very woke. They still want to hang on to gender identity ideology. They still want to promote it. And yet they're closing down their gender clinics for children. They're starting to understand that the public does not support. The public is, you're right, 80% in favor of female-only sex-based guidelines and eligibility in sports. And yet they keep going down this path. I think California even is showing signs at the ground level of turning red, turning Republican, because they're just getting tired of the Democrats not standing for anything reasonable. They've gone out of their minds, and people can't quite understand, like you say, why is this? How is this the hill to die on? So illogical.
You know, there was a phrase that I first heard during the pandemic called mass formation psychosis. It almost, you know, if I were to translate that into plain English, I would say sort of a mass hypnotic spell over people where they just sort of fell into a mania or something, peer pressure, conformity, or in other words, the boy who said the king's new clothes. You know, that old story. I think it was an Aesop's fable about the, you know, everyone said, "Look at the king in his lovely clothes," and it was a boy who said, the emperor has no clothes." I really think that for a while there, everyone was sort of gaslit into saying, "Yeah, that's a woman," and I think people are just shaking their heads and saying, "What was I doing there?" But how about up here in Canada? Because, like I say, the UK, they've had inquiries. One's called the Cass Report, the High Court case. In the US, we've just done a bit of a survey from Trump's executive orders to the University of Pennsylvania. But Canada seems to be digging in as much as ever on this. Why is that? And again, I'm with you. I think ordinary Canadians are just like ordinary Californians, just like ordinary Pennsylvanians. I think ordinary people think this is nuts, but maybe we haven't snapped out of the emperor has new clothes mind control yet. I don't know. What's going on?
Well, I think at the national level, the entities controlling sport and funding sport, they seem to have intimidated the sports organizations into adopting this idea that people can compete in whatever category they feel like or they want, and that men can compete in women's sports, and we should all just be quiet and be accepting. But at the ground level, again, most people disagree with that. And thank goodness in Alberta, at the provincial level, at least Alberta has Bill 29 that passed in December 2024, this past Christmas, that Danielle Smith is working hard to protect the female category, and anybody accepting funding from the Alberta government, whether that's a school or sports organization, has to ensure that there, in every sport, there must be at least one category that is female only. There can be other categories, but there has to be a category that's female